My name is Catherine Mohan. The date is April 13th, 2005. I am here today as part of the Connecticut Bar Foundation's James W. Cooper's Fellows Oral History of Connecticut Women in the Legal Profession Project. I'm here today to interview Sheila Hennessey, someone who I've admired for a very long time and have known for more than 20 years. Today we're going to ask Sheila about her own history being in the legal profession and her life. Sheila, could I have your full name, including your maiden name and your date of birth?
Sheila McHugh Hennessey, August 30th, 1937.
And Sheila, could you tell us about your background, where you grew up, where you went to school?
I grew up in Middletown, Connecticut, was born there and grew up there and went through high school there. And my father was a mechanic who operated a business on Main Street in Middletown. And I went up through St. John's School in Middletown, which you can still pass at the head of Main Street in Middletown. It's kind of an historic-looking school now, which gives you some idea of its age. But it was a good place to grow up. And as I say, I went to Wilson High School, Woodrow Wilson High School in Middletown also. My mother was a homemaker, and I have one older sister, 2 years older than I am. And my sister really was the first one in our family to go to college. My parents went through high school, but never had the opportunity to go to college. And in thinking about this interview and the kinds of questions there might be, I thought it was interesting that I don't think my sister or I ever assumed we would not go to college. So there must have been some transition there in terms of the generations as to what was expected, because we certainly did expect to go to college, and our parents encouraged that.
Well, what's interesting is your father must have been a terrific role model, considering there were 3 women, you had no brothers.
Right.
To, at that age, to encourage you. And so I'm interested in knowing the encouragement to go to college sounds like it was obvious. And what about where did you go to college? Why don't we start there?
I went to Albertus Magnus College in New Haven, in New Haven, which is a small Catholic women's college, or at least it was then, it is not now. When I say small, there were 55 of us, I think, in our class of 1958. So we all got to know each other very well. And thinking back on those times, it's very funny, the kinds of strict social code there was and strict dress code that there was, which right now just seemed fantastic if you talk to anybody about them. So odd in terms of a modern day. But for us, it was acceptable, and I enjoyed my college career very much. I majored in political science, and as it turned out, I was the only political science major in my class. So I had a kind of a one-on-one seminar arrangement in my senior year. Albertus was staffed and run at that point by Dominican nuns, and all of whom were very well educated themselves. And they really, really passed on a great deal of consciousness of the world and social responsibility. So I really think I had a very good background there, and I've been very grateful for it.
Now, when you were in college, especially at a women's college, were your professors primarily female professors, or were there also male professors there? And was there a difference in the way the male professors treated you as opposed to the female professors?
I don't think so. My professors were either Dominican nuns or Dominican fathers. And then we had a couple of lay teachers, both of whom, in my recollection, taught at Yale and were sort of ancillary on the Albertus campus. So we did have a variety of professors. I don't recall any specific difference in terms of approach. Actually, I felt my own mentor, perhaps, although it probably not in the same way that term is used today, but advisor, was a Dominican priest who encouraged postgraduate study in a lot of students.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Was there someone there that saw something in you that encouraged you to go on to law school? Because that would have been unusual, both from the Catholic background in a women's college. I would think that someone would have said, law school would be a good place for you. Why the law school, Sheila?
Well, as I say, I was a political science major, and in both high school and in college, I had taken part in these mock legislative sessions and that kind of study. And I think it's related. I think there's obviously a relationship there between the making of laws and the study of law. And so I think it was sort of a natural progression There was a woman who was 2 years ahead of me at Albertus, whose name was Joanne Kiley. She became Judge Joanne Kiley Kulowitz.
Yes, okay.
And she went to school, law school in Washington, D.C. And I saw her on several occasions after she had started law school. And we had been active in the same kinds of extracurricular things. And she told me that she found law school terrific. She really enjoyed it. She thought I would enjoy it. And so there was that kind of contact with someone who was going through that. When I think back of it, I don't have any recollection of thinking, gee, I'm trying to move into a male field. For some reason, I can't recall any feeling about that. It was just, if you want to go, then I think you should make an attempt at it.
Now, no lawyers in your family, nobody
No.
you look up to and said, wow, they've got a great life, I'd really like to be like my uncle.
No lawyers.
So
in the
you were the
family.
first, you're the first person in your family then to go to postgraduate, first lawyer in the family?
Yes, that's right. My sister did postgraduate work, but after she had children, she went back and got an MBA, which I think is even harder.
That's terrific.
But I went from college right to law school at Boston College.
And so you moved then, you had always lived in Connecticut and gone to school in Connecticut, you moved to the big city Boston. What was that
Right.
like?
Boston then is quite different from Boston now. Right now, I mean, I think for the last 10 or 12 years, it's been a magnet for people starting their careers, young people starting their careers. Of course, with all the colleges there too, it's also a natural attraction. It was different then. In fact, the law school, Boston College Law School, which is now located on the former campus of, I can't remember the name of the school, but it's in Newton, Massachusetts. It was a women's college. When I went to law school at Boston College, it was located on Lake Street in Brighton.
Okay.
And it was sort of at the base of the hill on which Boston College stands, and it was one single building. Now, on the campus that they have now, it was Newton College of the Sacred Heart. That was the
that's right,
college
Newton
that used to be there. Now they have a much bigger campus, which is where one of our sons went when he went to law school. But for us, it was very confined, in the one building. And they also ran a night school, a law school at night at that time, which is no longer in existence. And we had about 140 entering students in my class. I was in the class of 1961. I went, as I say, straight from college to law school. And again, it seems to me that I should have some recollection of feeling like a fish out of water. But I didn't. I was certainly apprehensive. It was late the first day for class, which meant I made an entrance into a male audience, which wasn't a good way to start. But it all was quite acceptable after that.
Now, your law school professors, were they primarily male?
Yes.
Did you have any female professors?
The only one that I recall is a woman who taught legal research. And all of us had to take legal research in our first year. I didn't happen to have her. We were broken down, I think, into 1/3 of the class went through these legal research class, and I didn't happen to have her as an instructor, but she was on board.
Was there any difference in the way the male professors treated you versus the one female professor you had, or did you feel treated differently than the other male counterparts in your class?
I don't think I ever did have that feeling. There was one other woman in my class in law school. During the transition, the period of the three-year course of study, 2 women entered and then left. So there were 2 of us who went through the full 3 years at that point. And we were very good friends at that point. We clung to each other sometimes.
I bet, just 2 of you.
But it was a good experience. I felt well prepared for law school. And I didn't find that anyone treated me in any different way, really, than the male students. And maybe because we were a novelty more at that point, and certainly maybe no one considered us a threat. Everyone was friendly. No one stole the books out of the library so that we couldn't see them or anything like that. And it was a very good overall experience.
Now, what about at law school? I know we had lots of study groups that were male and female together. Were those sorts of study groups things that happened at Boston College during that time, and would you have been included in a study group that included men, or did you find you and this one other female in the class were by yourself doing everything?
No, there were study groups. And I did attend a couple of them. They seemed to grow up around courses in which people, found it necessary, more necessary than others, to have a study group. So I did attend some of them, but I worked during law school also. So I had some difficulty in terms of scheduling. But for the most part, I think if you wanted to be a part of the study group and people thought you could participate and add something, there wasn't any barrier on gender.
So you also worked part-time and went to law school full-time?
I lived with the family and helped them out in what would probably be termed today an au pair process. They had 2 children. They were a terrific family, and they lived very nearby in Newton. And so I lived with them, which was my source for room and board because there was no dormitory or anything like that, and provided some services in terms of childcare and general help.
Did you find that other students also worked at Boston College during that time period, or did primarily
Yes.
most of the students full-time students?
No, a lot of the students worked. Now, when I started law school, it was in the fall of 1958. Quite a few of the men in the class were veterans. And they had either taken part in the Korean War or they were serving in service during that period of time, the mid-50s. And some were married, some had children. So we had really a variety of backgrounds and work habits and the kinds of activities that were undertaken. A lot of the male students worked part-time during law school.
Now, while you were in law school, were there other activities, extracurricular activities that you participated in the law school, or did you find just working and studying was enough?
There weren't too many extracurricular activities offered that I recall. All of it, moot court, for instance, was mandatory. You had to take part in moot court competition, which I found nerve-wracking, frankly, but perhaps the most nerve-wracking experience I had in law school. But there was also the law review. I was on the law review and wrote some notes and that kind of thing.
Now, the law review, if you were on the law review, were both the only 2 females in your class on the law review, or only you on the law review?
We both were.
Wow.
And the other woman who was in my class, whose name was Ann Jones, and now is Sprague, graduated #1 in our class.
Wow,
She was a
that's
very,
fantastic.
very accomplished woman, and even before she came to law school, and certainly continued that after law school.
And what was it like to be on the Law Journal, which had to have been primarily men? And certainly the people who end up being on those law journals tend to be the most aggressive people in law school. So what did you find the atmosphere at the Law Journal different? Was there any experience there that you thought, okay, now I feel like maybe there is a difference between being a female going to law school and being a male?
Not so much gender-based, but there was a lot more level of competition in terms of who was assigned what, who was named any kind of an editor. There was a lot of jockeying there that I never did see, in the general population in law school. But again, I didn't, and maybe I should have, but I didn't see it as gender-based at that point. Maybe because, as I say, the other female in the class was also an outstanding student and on the law review, and so we didn't get that impression.
Now, Sheila, the whole total class when you graduated Boston Law School, how many students total?
I believe in our graduating class there were about 115.
So you were 2 out of 115.
In that class. Now, in the other classes that were going through the law school at the same time, there were other women in the classes coming behind us.
And as you progressed through the 3 years, did you see more women coming in, like the year you were leaving? Were there more women coming in that freshman year? Did you see a change, or did it pretty much stay 2 to 3?
It stayed pretty much very small numbers while I was in law school. I do remember reading the alumni magazine after graduation, in which it was very noticeable that there were many more women entering the law school in the 60s, late 60s. But until then, there really were not.
Did you have any special mentor that you can look back on that you think, well, this particular person is the person who helped me through law school, helped me get on with my law career?
Not a particular person, but certainly a group a group of people that I was friendly with in law school, all of whom were supportive, and without the feeling that if you do well, that means I won't do as well, kind of feeling. So there really was a very congenial atmosphere. Again, maybe because we were a novelty and not a threat to anybody, or not perceived as a threat. She has a spot because she's a woman. There didn't seem to be that sense yet when I was in law school. I think there was later on, from what I've read anyway and heard. But at that point, there really was not. And it was a pretty congenial atmosphere. And I didn't have any sense that anybody was targeting me for anything.
And it sounds like you felt like you were treated absolutely fairly throughout your whole 3 years at being at Boston College Law School, that there was no difference made of you when it came to professor or grades.
I really didn't have that feeling anywhere through. Father Dronian, who was a Jesuit priest who was later a congressman, was the dean of the law school at the time that I was there.
And my professor at Georgetown Law School.
Well, I didn't know that.
Yes.
Yeah. He was a man who, his whole reputation was as a real liberal when he was in Congress. And maybe I think that thinking probably pervaded the positions he held prior to that, this is an open society and everyone should have an equal opportunity. And I just didn't have a sense that I was being shut out of anything.
Now, as you went through law school, did you ever think, okay, here it is, I'm going to graduate, what am I going to do after that? And what were your thoughts about, were law firms open to women then, or were you perceived as, okay, the job for a woman lawyer is to go into the government or is to do something else? What were your perceptions of where you thought you could go after you graduated?
Well, it was not confused, but it was directed a little bit by the fact that I became engaged in law school to my husband, who was in my law school class. And so our approach pretty much was the first one of us who gets a job, that's where we're going to be.
Well, that's fair.
Yes. And we were looking at Washington, thinking about the atmosphere there, and the opportunities there. Several of our professors suggested, not to us but to the whole class, that people who graduated from Boston College Law School tended to congregate in Boston. And in fact, I remember our property professor saying, there is a country out there west of Springfield that's pretty open and that you might want to explore. And as it happened, my husband was the first one to get employment, and that was with the federal district judge in Hartford. So I began looking in this area for a job. I interviewed with several firms, and I eventually took a job on the legal staff of Connecticut, what used to be Connecticut General Life Insurance Company, at their Bloomfield headquarters.
Now, why don't we, since you brought up your husband, what was your husband's name?
Edward Hennessey.
Very distinguished lawyer in Hartford.
Yeah.
We all know him and loved him. And you then got married in what year, Sheila?
In 1961.
So right out of law school.
Right, we graduated in June and we were married at the end of August. In between, I had to take the bar exam here. Ed couldn't because he wasn't a resident of Connecticut, he was a resident of Massachusetts. So he had to wait until December to take the bar exam in Connecticut, but it didn't bar him from accepting the clerkship.
And so then you went, which at that time, those jobs were considered very good jobs to have, to come and work in an insurance company in Connecticut. And let's talk about the day you sat for the bar. When you looked around the room, how many women in the room were taking the bar exam?
The bar exam was given down at Yale Law School in late June or early July, as I recall, in 1958. And I was probably too nervous to look around the room, but there were very few women. And we were seated alphabetically.
Oh, you were?
Yes, so that I didn't really get much of a chance to interact except with the MCs around me, One thing I think is interesting that has changed a lot since I was in law school is the LSAT. I can recall when I was thinking about going to law school, having one of the professors at college saying, why don't you just take the LSAT, see how you do, because it's aptitudinal and it'll give you a good idea of how well you might do. There was no LSAT preparation. There was no course to take, for it. And I recall filing the papers necessary to turn up that day. That was also given at Yale. And walking in and taking the test. And I've since had children who've gone to law school and have spent weeks and months in preparation on the LSAT, and when my husband and I would tell them there wasn't that kind of preparation, they're just kind of shocked that there wasn't. But that's a big change from the time that I went to law school and prepared for law school to now, because it's become pretty much a separate industry. Not just LSATs, but I guess all of the graduate school preparation
Taking the
now
courses,
have courses. Yeah.
that's, nobody, just like, well, for the bar exam, did they offer a bar exam course to study?
Yes, there was a bar review course taught in Hartford then taught by Bill Moeller and Charles Moeller.
Wow.
And it ran, I believe, I believe it ran for 6 weeks prior to the exam. And I know I was late starting because I was late getting down from Massachusetts, but it was an excellent course. It really went over all of the areas in which you'd be tested. And they did a very good job with it.
Was the bar exam given in July like it is now then?
Yeah, it was either late June or early July that year, as I recall. And we got the results in August.
And of course, the bar exam then, was it 1 day or was it the 2 days?
It was 2 days.
Oh, it was the 2 days.
There was not the multiple choice section.
The multi-state, which is what we're all required to do.
Right, multi-state, right.
Yeah. And was the Connecticut bar ever part oral exam, or was it always the 2 days of written?
It was always the 2 days of written. You had to be interviewed prior to the exam in terms of fitness by either one or two attorneys in your area, in the area in which, I guess, of your residence at that point. So that preceded the bar exam at that point. But there was no oral presentation made. It was simply an interview and a background
Yeah, which is something
interview.
that they don't do anymore. I suppose there's just too many people applying to be lawyers to do that. And so you then went right to work, you took the bar exam, and then when did you start?
Passed the bar exam.
Got married.
Got married the following week, I think, or 2 weeks after that, and started work, right. And Ed had to be on the job early in September also, so we went right to work. And we were doing very well. He was paid $5,200 a year, and I was paid $5,000 a year. So we were doing very well in 1961.
Yes.
When we tell that to our children, they kind of, you couldn't possibly have been paid. Yes, we were, And people were very glad to have that kind of salary.
A starting
in 1961.
salary, yeah.
Right.
And now, what kinds of work did you do? Were you in the legal department there?
I was in the legal department, and there were, there was a general counsel and counsel, and then the associates and assistant counsel. So there were about 7 of us, I think, 7 or 8 of us on the staff, and they were all very supportive. They had not had a woman on the staff before, I give them a lot of credit for handling the situation very well. They didn't make a production out of it. You were just expected to come in and familiarize yourself with your office and the general kinds of work that you'd be doing, looking over releases, reviewing cases that were tried outside of the office. None of the staff went out as trial lawyers for the company. A lot of reinsurance work, as I recall. However, I was there a very short time, because at that time you had to leave the company when you were in your 6th month of pregnancy. You could not continue past that period of time.
And it's interesting because several people recently I've had this conversation with, including teachers at that time. You had to go home. You couldn't work anymore. And so you were then pregnant with your first child, Sheila. And let's talk about that. Your first child was born when?
August of 1962.
And did you, at that time, was it even offered that you could go back part-time? What did...
No, it wasn't. And I don't know that I would have wanted to at that point. I think my outlook was, well, I've made another choice here, and so I intended to stay at home. And we had children in quick succession after that. So I never really sat down and thought, do I want to go to work and also do this? I think it's so hard these days. You know, it must be so difficult for young women who are balancing those kinds of responsibilities. But at that time, I had made a choice not to go back to work at that time.
And was that a choice? It sounds like a personal choice to you.
Yes.
But even if it was a choice that you didn't want to make, would there have been an opportunity, for example, at that time to work part-time and to raise your children part-time, or would that have been out of the question in the 1960s, do you think?
No, it wouldn't have been out of the question, but it would have been very difficult. I don't know of any part-time situations that would have worked, which would have meant that you would have to have, you know, full child care, which was really
Unheard
not
of then.
generally offered
No,
at that
no.
point. And that probably would have been private child care in your home, something of that nature. But as I say, I didn't really ever make that choice. You know, we talked it over for quite some time. I think my husband worried that if I didn't keep a hand in kind of thing, I was going to feel that I was wasting some part of my life. And I never had that feeling. But I had to keep reassuring him of that.
I was going to ask you if at that time in the 1960s, which is my perception anyway, that there would have been a stigma anyway if you had decided to go back part-time and to leave your kids at home.
There probably would have been. I was trying to think as we just went through these questions whether I knew anyone who actually did do that. And I knew several women who were older, whose children were older and in school, who did work part-time. So it was sort of evolving, I think. But to leave very young children and go back to work probably would have been viewed as not the appropriate thing to do.
Now, how many children did you have total?
Four boys.
4 boys, and you said in very quick succession, so they're very close in age.
Yes.
And Sheila, did you continue to raise all 4 boys? Was there a point in time where you did go back part-time? Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Right. I really didn't do anything in terms of working outside my home. I did a lot of community activities during those growing up years. But I didn't do anything in terms of employment outside of my home until my youngest son was 8 or 9 years old and in school all day. And then at that point, I opened an office for general practice as part of my home. We had an addition on our home, and I was able to set up like a two-room office there, which worked very well for me.
And of course, you and your husband by this time had moved to Wethersfield.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And your office was on very popular street in town, a very beautiful old house. Mm-hmm. And at some point in time, which is how I got to know you, you got involved in politics. So I'm wondering, are we there yet, or you just started your practice part-time? Were you involved in politics at that time in Wethersfield?
I was. I was involved in politics before I actually went back to practice, which was in 1977. And I had been on the Board of Education, which is maybe a natural progression for, someone who's been active in school activities, PTAs, all that kind of thing. And I found those issues really interesting, emotional but interesting. And so I had served on the Board of Education, and I continued doing that.
Now, you were on the Board of Ed for how many years? Because I do know that you were chairman of the Board of Ed for a period of time also.
I was on the Board of Education for 10 years, and then served briefly on the town council, and then ran for judge of probate in our district, which consists of 3 towns, Wethersfield, Newington, and Rocky Hill. And that was in 1991. And that's the position that I've served in continuously since then.
And just to go back in politics, because that's where I got to know you and so admired you and your time at the Board of Ed, that I followed you up into the Board of Ed, which I enjoyed tremendously, probably more than my 2 years on the town council. But, and so I admired the fact, Sheila, that you were able to balance politics and a law practice in Wethersfield. And lots of women always ask me this, and how did you go about getting clients? I mean, women today, and I'm sure it was then, have a really hard time figuring out, okay, how do I get a client to hire me? And, because is it still the stigma out there? And I'm not so sure it is anymore. Geez, I think a male lawyer would be better for this or that. So I'm interested in knowing, since you had your office at your home, how it is you went about getting clients.
Well, I'd had people ask me over years if I could do things for them, like, wills or prepare for a real estate closing if they were buying a home, and I never did that. But then when I opened my own office, I had some contacts with people who were either in the real estate field or other lawyers that I knew who really couldn't take on additional clients, so I would get some referrals in that respect. I think being in politics helps. Your name, for better or for worse, is out there. And so it just sort of gradually evolved. I don't remember taking any specific steps to advertise or anything like that. I didn't do that.
Never advertised, right?
No, I never
so
did.
now that is, do you see that as a big difference between the practice of law as you've grown up through it and today?
Oh, tremendous difference. I mean, the first ads I think the perception generally was, that's terrible, You just don't do that. But of course you do now, and there's lots and lots of advertising and brochures and a whole industry built up around advertising and finding clients. The field of law has become so much more crowded since when I came out of law school. The fact that there were not that many lawyers in the early 60s. Now, and I think the explosion began probably in the law schools in the 70s and has continued. I think as I read about it, I think it's cooled a little bit from the mid-90s forward, but during that period of time there was just an explosion of people attending law school and women in the law school. The first time I heard that there was a 50-50 ratio in law school, I thought, gee, this is terrific, this really is, because it's seen as an opportunity for everyone at that point. I think as that came to be, probably, what I earlier referenced, the fact that we were probably a novelty in law school, sort of left alone. But when more women were in law school, I think it became a lot more competitive for them and more difficult for them. And probably the atmosphere wasn't as collegial for women at that point. I think because then men did perceive a threat, from women maybe taking what they thought to be their. I probably just did something to my microphone. What they perceived as their place.
And that's interesting, as most graduating classes now are 50-50, that there are many more women out into the practice of law. And as being a sole practitioner for a while and a probate judge now for more than 10 years, do you see the difference in how women approach law as opposed to men when they appear in front of you at probate court?
Well, in the probate court, which as you know, is considered perhaps more of a user-friendly atmosphere than the superior court. Less formality, no robes worn, no raised dais for the judge. The empathetic approach that women perhaps are more naturally take is very effective in probate court. It's not a banging heads kind of situation. I did some divorce work when I was in practice, and I really came to admire a lot of women who did that, because I felt that they were extremely helpful to their client, as well as being effective on their feet in the courtroom. I didn't do a lot of other trial work, so I didn't get a chance to observe a lot of women in that atmosphere. But those that I did, I thought were so effective. Again, because we each bring everything we are to whatever it is that we're undertaking. And so many women, I think, bring everything in terms of their education as well as their poise to a situation like that. And there's something extra there, I think.
Now, do you think that, as I think sometimes there's a perception out there, that more women lawyers go into certain fields like probate, the schedules are better, riding wills, and that they're more drawn to, let's say, family law? Do you have a particular, do you see that? Is that perception true? Is it?
I don't know if I have enough general knowledge to really to say authoritatively anything about that. I do have some connection to it in terms of the firm that my husband worked with, which is a large firm in Hartford. And the number of women partners and the feeling as women came up through that. I'm certainly not going to comment on it specifically because I was not a part of that, but I observed some of it, and I think it was harder, much harder.
I often see, for schedule-wise, for women who have small kids, a much easier route to go in the probate area or the family law than trial law, where you're asked to be in court and you're trying cases.
You just don't have the flexibility.
You
have to be where you have to be when you have to be there, and your other commitments really have to take second place. And that's difficult. And that's true, as I say, I think in the larger firms, too. You're expected to be where you were expected to be. And you don't have a wife at home who can pick up the slack because you're the wife also. In that respect, I think it's been a lot harder for women. But I really admire the women that I see practicing.
Now,
in difficult fields.
You have one son who's a lawyer, or more than one son?
I have 3 sons who are lawyers.
3 sons who are lawyers. So
yeah. One is a public defender in California, and the other 2 are with larger firms, one in North Carolina and one in Boston, and they do trial work.
And are any of them married to lawyers? Or?
Yes, 2 are. My son is a public defender in California. His wife is also a public defender. And in Boston, my daughter-in-law does specialized insurance defense work.
Well, that must be very interesting for you to see young women lawyers and know what you had to do to get there. Do you see for them is the balancing of family and their careers? Have you experienced those sorts of differences? Do they both work? Do they stay home?
They both work, and they both return to their work shortly after the children were born, I think between 3 and 6 months after they had children. And as I say, I observe this, and I'm astonished that anybody can do this, can really retain a balance and make it work, and they do. They really do. And I look back and think, I don't think I could have done this. Now, maybe you do whatever you're going to do, and you just make up your mind you're going to do it. But I find it really fascinating to watch my daughters-in-law, and my third daughter-in-law also runs her own business.
Wow.
So, although she's not in the legal field, she's in another field, and she runs her own business, and they are able to keep it all going, and not feel that they're exhausting themselves.
Or missing out on something.
They must be exhausted, yes. but they make it work. And as an observer of it, I think this is terrific. It really is.
Now, the changes in more women in the legal field. There's also been changes technology-wise, which you and I were talking about before. And has to have been a tremendous change in the way things were done when you first became a lawyer to the way things are done now. We carry our cell phones, we carry our BlackBerries around, most of my young associates do their own typing, and so why don't you tell us a little bit about that, only because you had a very amusing story from probate court that I wish you'd share with us.
Right. Well, I always had, when I first worked back in the 60s, and then when I went back to work, I always had an assistant who could take dictation. And so I got very used to presenting ideas through dictation, doing drafts, and marking them up. And I never even thought twice about it. That was how it was done. And as I say, I always had terrific assistants who got me through a lot of situations because they did it so well. And when I first started at the probate court, and we had our first staff meeting, we just talked generally about what everybody did. And I said, now, who takes the dictation? And they all looked at me and said, we don't do that. And since I have terrible penmanship, I try to work on that. Even now, I try to work on that. I found myself having to, go to a computer and draft there, which I hadn't done before. I was pretty behind the times, I think, in even approaching that. I could always type, and do something that way, but not have a computer where I could correct everything as I went along. So, that's been a plus too. I've learned something that I needed to learn, and found out the world didn't work quite the way I expected it was going to. And so it's been good for me.
Now, do you use email? Is that part of yours?
I do email myself, but we don't email at the office, so and I'm not really very good at it. I'm always certain that I'm sending it off into cyberspace or to somebody, who's going to wonder who I am when they get this message. But we don't do that at the office, no.
And cell phone, what about?
I have a cell phone that I carry. I got a cell phone so that if I was running late or had to be someplace else, I could contact people. I never expected that people were going to want to call me on my cell phone. And my sons do say to me, why do you have a cell phone when it's never turned on? I said, because I have it for a particular purpose. But I'm getting better at that. I will remember to turn it on from time to time so that somebody can get hold of me. But my primary purpose always was so that I could contact whoever I had to. So it's a whole different kind of thing.
It is, and even for me, having graduated 20 years, I find you have to know how to market now. You have to know you have to be high tech. I mean, I have a laptop. I hardly turn it on. I mean, so I find those things when I sit back and say, I didn't go to law school to learn how to use my email, but those are all parts of being a lawyer now.
Right, they are definitely, and all the electronic filings. We don't do it in the probate court, but of course, I see all the brochures that come through or the announcements that come through from the Superior Court about all the electronic filings, and I look at them and think, I probably would have problems with this, but obviously you just get used to it. It's just another way of doing the same thing.
And we all believe someday everybody. I mean, that's just the way. You'll get your order on email, which, federal court now, it's all that way. So, for those of us who loved low tech, I'm just being forced into the high tech world of the practice of law. But what about the changes in the practice of law on a person-to-person level? I mean, the last year or two here in Connecticut, we've had some serious issues, ethical issues with lawyers, and it's almost a weekly occurrence now in the Connecticut Law Tribune. And have you noticed that? I mean, is this a big change in the way lawyers, first of all, the way society perceives them, or just the way in which our profession now practice?
Well, you'd like to think that law schools are impressing on law students the fact that you have a real responsibility here, an ethical responsibility, and I don't know if that's not being perceived or being taught, or simply because there are so many more lawyers, and with so much greater a population of legally trained people, you find that there are some among them who are not what you would want. I certainly have had the experience in probate court of finding out that a lawyer that I thought I knew, thought I could depend upon, would take assignments from us pro bono when he acted as the fiduciary in a large estate, created a huge situation through his own malfeasance and took the money. And I was deeply shocked. One, I felt personally betrayed, and two, thought, how could you do this? How could you do this to someone else? Here you are, a responsible lawyer, or supposedly a responsible lawyer, and you simply turned your back on everything that you should have known, and took money that didn't belong to you, that belonged to the charitable organizations that your client, for whom you wrote this will, directed that they would go, and you took on that extra fiduciary responsibility as the executor for her to carry out these wishes, and you didn't do it. Not only did you not do it, you're a criminal essentially, and so of course, seeing that situation, you're a mandatory reporter of that, to the grievance committee and to the necessary personnel in the state's attorney's office. And that lawyer did serve time in federal prison. Actually, he was convicted on electronic transfers of the funds in the federal court rather than in the criminal court. And there have been two other instances in which I've been personally aware that attorneys have committed malfeasance in terms of their fiduciary responsibilities. And as I say, it's personally very, very distressing. It's a person that you've looked at and who's sat there and lied to you, essentially, about what they're doing. And you just expect more of that from lawyers entering the probate courtroom or any courtroom, or simply taking on the title of professional, an attorney. I just don't expect it. I still don't expect it. I read about it over and over, and I think, why is that happening?
Now let's talk about your tenure here as a probate judge. Not many women probate judges in the history of the state of Connecticut. What was it like? Now that's an elected position, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so you have to run how many times? Once every certain number of years?
Every 4 years.
Once every 4 years.
It's at on the schedule of the gubernatorial election. So probate judges all run every 4 years. And when I ran in 1991, I had to go through a primary as well as the general election.
Oh yes.
And since I was used to running, that wasn't a major problem. I kind of like election season. But the last 2 times I've been unopposed, which is a real treat, because then you don't have to go through that. And the probate court is just a very interesting place. Very interesting issues.
Now, when you first ran, that was a new court, correct? Newington, Wethersfield.
Right. All of those courts, the towns contiguous to Hartford had been in the Hartford probate court, and then they began to split off West Hartford to a single court. And then the tri-town area of Wethersfield, Rocky Hill, and Newington became a court. And since it serves a population of over 70,000 persons, it's designated as a high-volume court. So we're a busy court. Some courts, as you know, some very small towns have their own probate court. So you may get, it's a very variegated system in the sense that you may have a probate judge who's serving 4,000 to 5,000 people, and then the judge in Bridgeport who's serving, I think when I last looked at it, like 160,000, or Hartford with 141,000. So there's a huge difference, in the way probate courts are run and what their responsibilities are.
And technically in the state of Connecticut, those are part-time jobs.
Yes.
But as in your case, you were telling me your part-time job, even though you only paid part-time, has really become full-time for you.
Right, because I had my own practice, and I found that if I had been in a firm, even a small firm, I think, where you had coverage for each other, I would have maintained a practice. But since I was by myself, it began to make me a little nervous that I was trying to cover too much, and so slowly have stopped taking new clients, and really spend almost all of my time now in the probate court.
And Sheila, how many days do you go to probate court? Is it an every day?
Yes.
Or
yes, I'm there
day?
every day, right. We schedule hearings every day except for Friday. The reason we don't schedule Friday is that I try to catch up on anything that wasn't written up during the week on Friday. And as I say, it's very different because other probate courts might only have hours, say, 10 to 2, on Tuesday and Thursday, because they have a much smaller population. But where we are, I feel I really should be there more.
And now, do the probate judges meet monthly? I mean, do all of you meet for meetings? Is there a collegiate sort of atmosphere with the probate judges around the state of Connecticut?
Mm-hmm. We have an administrator who's appointed by the Chief Justice, and presently that's Judge Lawler, who was the probate judge in Waterbury. And we have what's called a probate assembly, which consists of all the judges, who are now number 123. And we meet at least quarterly. We have an annual meeting coming up at the end of April, where we elect new officers. And unfortunately, in the past couple of years, there's been a more contentious atmosphere among judges because most of the work of the probate court, or the greater part, say that about 60% of the work of the probate courts is related to decedents' estates. And the fees that the probate court receives from decedents' estates are based upon the succession tax filing. The succession tax, of course, is being phased out in Connecticut. Mm-hmm. So the flow of fees is drying up somewhat and creating a financial situation in which smaller courts particularly might be more affected. And so there's been a level of contentiousness among judges who might have to consolidate their courts or take part in a plan where they would not be voluntarily merged with someone else. Their court simply would be involuntarily merged. And then, of course, you have the who runs for office and those kinds of issues. And a lot of the judges, particularly in the smaller courts, feel that they are really very well suited to serve their populations, and they probably are. They know their communities very well. But the financial realities are beginning to bring us to a situation where there are going to be some changes.
And when you first became a probate judge in 1991, how many other women were probate judges around the state of Connecticut?
Quite a few. Suzanne Powers, who oddly, not oddly, but coincidentally followed me, was 2 years after me at Boston College Law School, was the president of the Connecticut Probate Assembly when I became a probate judge. She was from New Milford. She's no longer serving as probate judge, but she was the first woman who was president of the Connecticut Probate Assembly. So there are quite a few women who are judges probate judges in Connecticut, and not many people are aware. You don't have to be a lawyer to be a probate judge.
Oh, really?
In Connecticut. I'm not sure how that works. Essentially, if you don't have the training and you have a lot of contested cases in which you move from a less formal atmosphere to a more formal atmosphere of a contested matter, with evidentiary presentations and so forth. All of the judges in the larger courts are lawyers, but many among the smaller courts are not.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm. Oh, I don't think many people know that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And did you ever find, from 1991 on, any difference in the way a woman probate judge was treated, either by a lawyer who appears in front of you or by other probate judge colleagues?
No, I haven't. I think, as I say, there's a history of women probate judges, so that probably helps. And also, I think judges, rather lawyers who come into any court, for the most part, other than those that that I referenced before who have let us all down, come in with the atmosphere that this is maybe a different setting, but it is a judicial proceeding, and they treat it as such, and they treat the judge respectfully.
It seems, Sheila, as we've made this discussion through your life's history so far, that there's no point in time where it sounds to me like you at least ever felt, that you were treated differently or unfairly because you were a woman, or someone made a distinction, whether it was in college or law school or straight up through, which I have to say, considering there were only 2 of you in the whole entire class at Boston College, to be extraordinary. That you at least had a perception of complete and utter fairness throughout the whole thing. And so I'm sitting here wondering whether that has more to say about you and your personality than it does maybe about, the way it really was. But I'm very intrigued by the fact that, all these years you could sit back and say, well, I don't in my own mind ever consider having been prejudiced because I was a female, or someone shutting a door and not opening a door for me. So I find that interesting, and I'm wondering, why you think that is. Now, my perception is it's because of your personality, and that might have something to do with it, but to me it's very interesting that...
Well, in reviewing my history, I probably wasn't as specific as I should have been in coming out of law school and interviewing for positions.
Oh yeah, let's talk about that. What was that like?
I interviewed with a couple of firms in Hartford, and one of the judges, in terms of a clerkship. I was late in terms of the clerkship interview. The clerkship that I would have been interested in would have been like a whole year away at that point because I interviewed late. But in interviewing with a couple of firms, there were questions asked that would never, ever pass the test today. Never. Do you expect to have a family? And how will that affect your career? And those were routinely, I think at that point, presented to a woman who would be interviewing.
Well, did you interview with any women in any of these law firms?
No, but I did talk to a woman who was an attorney in Hartford, about the process. She was with a small firm, and she said, I think you'll be better off doing what I am doing, in a smaller firm. So she obviously had a perception that the larger firms were not going to move her to the situation that she wanted to attain, a partnership and that. I think that was definitely her perception of the employment opportunities at that point.
Well, as you looked around Hartford and interviewed in some of the larger law firms, were there any women partner at that time?
No.
I mean, no women partners.
No, not that I was aware of. There was, when I went to Connecticut General, there was a woman officer, Martina Doyle, who was an actuary, I believe by background. And she was the only woman officer at that point at that insurance, a large insurance company. A very interesting woman, you know, very, she presented herself so well, and she had done so well, really obviously by fact of her own ability, and very capable. No, there were not women partners, at least none that I was aware of.
And did you think that that prevented women like you from, let's say, starting in a big firm if you looked ahead and said, well, it doesn't look like, you know, partnership track is really available for women? Do you think that discouraged women at that time from going and looking at big firms as a choice for a job?
Well, I think it may have sort of generally. I think the atmosphere was not welcoming as you might have, as welcoming as you might have hoped. But the other woman who was in my law classes, law school classes, I told you, she went to a very large firm in Boston, a very prestigious firm, right out of law school. And I'm trying to remember as we were just talking about this issue, whether at the time she went there were women ahead of her who were partners. And frankly, I do not recall. If there were, they were very few.
And did she stay there to become a partner in that firm, or did she leave to do something else?
She stayed there for quite some time, and then she left, and she was working in Washington, and she had a very full career with the Federal Communications Commission.
Well, I think we're going to take a short break right now.
Okay.
Thank you, Sheila. We're back from our break now, and I'd just like to conclude with some more questions about being a probate judge, Sheila. Judges have esteemed positions in our community. I'm wondering what your opinion is about what judges should do outside of just being a judge. Some judges take a more active role in giving opinions about things, about being visible in the community. What's your position on how judges should act outside of their position?
Well, I really think that they, in terms of any issues that might be deemed partisan or controversial, you have to fade into the background. We all have a code of judicial conduct, and there are certain guidelines that we simply have to maintain. And we're different from the Superior Court judges in as much as they are full-time judges, they are appointed judges, so they never have to run for office. Probate judges who have to run for office need to be really careful about, for instance, things like campaign finance. I don't think you can ever be perceived as favoring someone, and lawyers would be the ones who would gravitate to financing a judge's campaign, because they're the ones who have the knowledge of what the position encompasses and who may be appearing there, and are so more interested in whom the judge might be. But you have to be really very, very careful about being perceived as favoring someone, either with appointments or with decisions, heaven forbid, who might have contributed to your campaign. The last couple of times, as I say, I've run unopposed, so that is not an issue.
Right.
But there are other judges, who've had highly contested election campaigns, and in this day and age, you need to raise money in order to effectively reach your constituents. So this could be a real problem. It has not been, as far as I know, thus far, but you have to be really careful, and you have to be careful about appearing to take a position, a public position, on an issue that has no relationship to your court. I think, because people may find your opinion, for better or for worse, to be more valuable than someone else's, and you just can't really find yourself in that position.
Do you think there will ever come a time where Connecticut might move away from the election of probate judges to an appointment, or is that something that you think, in the way we operate, will never be considered?
I think it's quite possible. Connecticut does have a unique probate court system in the sense that it's 200 years old and it's evolved with courts in each town that may or may not be the most efficient and empathetic way to handle situations. People are fearful of the probate court system being somehow merged into the superior court system because you will lose that informality that I think helps to get people through what are usually very difficult times in their lives. But that's always an option. You know, if something can't be worked out so that the finances of the probate court can be appropriately managed and we can all continue to exist, that is always an option, either in a magistrate kind of system or simply a merger. I would hope not, because I think there's something very special about the probate courts in Connecticut in the sense that people do come in apprehensive sometimes if they haven't had any relationship to any court proceeding and are relieved to find that they're not going to be placed in a situation that they maybe have seen from television where they're going to be grilled over something or a lot of cross-examination. Even in those matters that are contested, you know, a will contest or termination of parental rights, you know, those matters that are contested and evidence is taken, I think still the atmosphere is different. And though you're following the same evidentiary rules and coming to the conclusion that's necessitated by the evidence, the atmosphere, I think, helps people get through it. And the probate courts are handling a lot more children's matters, particularly the urban probate courts. And those need a lot of hands-on, I think, a lot of hands-on management. And there's a new children's regional probate court in the New Haven area, which serves New Haven and all of the smaller towns around it. And all of the judges there do take part. But it's set up so that there are court service officers and there are DCF workers who are in the same area, physically in the same area, within the court structure, and that can provide many, many services to families in need and to guardians who are appointed than the individual probate courts can. So I think that is the coming situation, really, in terms of regionalization and specialization. As you know, how much specialization there is in the law itself these days that there wasn't when I came out of law school. And I think the same thing is happening in terms of management of cases.
Actually, that's a very good point. When you got out of law school, or let's say your husband Ed got out of law school, you weren't put into a particular practice group, you know, which is what happens today.
Right.
And told, okay, you want to be a corporate lawyer, here it is. We all got an opportunity to do all kinds of things before we figured out what we were good at and what we weren't good at. Have you actually seen the specialization of the law help the profession or work against the profession? What do you think about that?
Well, I guess yes and no. In areas of specialization, like, say, environmental law or something like that, which is so obtuse as far as I'm concerned, but obviously is very clear to those who specialize in it, it probably helps a lot, you know, because to try to catch up, if you're a generalist, and try to catch up, you know, in an area of specialization such as that, I would think would be difficult, and you might be concerned that you're not getting all the nuances that someone who specializes in it would pick up immediately. In the field like, say, elder law, which has a closer relationship to probate, and which has become very specialized, it seems to me, in the last 10 or 12 years, it's very helpful because you really are targeting an area of society at that point that could use some concentration. So certainly in those respects, I think it is. I think it must be difficult if you come out of law school and you're slotted in and you don't want to be in your slot. You know, to try to change it, particularly in the larger firms, might be much more difficult. And the ability of generalists even to practice anymore is becoming more and more difficult. There's, you know, the level of competition is greater, and the background perhaps needed, the amount of research needed to approach various fields, I think it's just all become harder. So maybe the specialization, just as in the medical field, is necessary. But you sort of hate to see the generalists lose ground so completely.
And I think that goes the same way with the sole practitioner. It's rare now these days to see a sole practitioner because it's almost impossible for them to practice law, helping their neighborhoods and things like that. So I think specialization has hurt that whole sole practitioner's ability to practice law and to make a business out of it.
I would agree, right, to make a living.
To make, it's so, and I do see that sole practitioners as a loss to small communities and neighborhoods. You know, people have got to go to the big city now and pay big prices for lawyers, and I see that as part of the problem. There's just so many laws created, the regulatory versus, you know, that it's almost impossible, you know, to keep up. And, and you know, lawyers are sued more frequently now than ever before. And so you don't want to risk doing something outside your specialty anymore.
That's right.
That must be a change that you've seen. I mean, lawyers, just like everybody else.
Yes.
You know, being sued for things, which is really something, at least 20 years ago, I never even saw and see.
Right, and I think you're correct in as much as perhaps some lawyers try to take on more than they can, in the sense that it requires a good deal of research to move into something that they haven't had any experience with. And if they are either a sole practitioner or a small firm, they just don't have the research abilities to do that. And so you try to venture out there, and then you find yourself in trouble. And if you can't back out and you bring somebody else in, you may wind up being sued yourself. So it's a real concern.
As you look back over your career, Sheila, did going to law school and being in the legal profession meet your expectations? Did you say, okay, you know, 30 years post, 40 years post law school, I'm really where I want to be. It's just what I thought I would do.
I think it did in most general respects, maybe not in some specifics, but certainly in general expectations. As I say, I think the study of law and the practice of law and the interest in politics and the making of laws are all sort of interconnected, and that's always been an interest of mine. And I think, too, in terms of returning to practice, once I had become involved in raising a family, I could not have done it the way I did it without my husband's help, because he obviously had practiced law continuously through these years, and I think everyone needs someone to whom they can turn and say, I'm not sure about this. You know, what is this? What you need someone. You need someone. I would either have had to go with a firm, or I couldn't have done it the way I did it without someone to whom I could say, I'm not sure about this. Is this the way this complaint should look? You know, is this right? I think everybody needs that, and I would have needed a mentor if I hadn't had him as my mentor. So, because again, from the time I graduated from law school and the time I went back to practice, lots had changed. Things had changed, a good deal, and so I was certainly very, very grateful for that level of support, because he never said, you're going to have to figure this out yourself, or something of that nature. And not that I was calling him every hour to find out if I was doing the right thing, but just the feeling that you have someone that you can rely on, who will help you through a difficult situation. And he was very good at that. He was also very helpful to other lawyers, who needed that kind of help.
And throughout your whole career, he really supported you in everything you wanted to do, whether it was run for town council or run for the board, and certainly being chairman of the board in Wethersfield. That was a very time-consuming job, and you still had 4 boys.
It was.
And you did such a fine job, because you took it seriously and spent the time you needed to do. But your husband always, it seems to me that's an important part of your success, has been the fact that you had your husband.
A very, very, very great part of my success. I really could not have done it without that kind of person, who was willing and able to be supportive, and who never really thought about, not doing that. That was simply was his nature, and so it was extremely important to me.
And what I think is interesting is that you actually married someone from your law school class. There were only 2 of you. You must have been, he must have had to fight very hard for you, Sheila. All those men wanting dates with you. So he knew he had gotten something special, I'm sure, after that. So. But now, as you went, you could have at some point in time, which I always thought, after the town council decided to go into politics, either run for state rep or run for state senate, but you chose probate judge, which was more in line with your legal profession, but I always have wanted to ask you that question, why you picked running for probate judge over some other political position, which would have, certainly you were very popular, you would have absolutely been a great choice for either of those positions.
Why, thank you. But I was interested in the probate judgeship because I had done work in the probate court, and I'd also done work in the juvenile court system, where lawyers are appointed to represent children as well as parents whose rights are being contested. And I just found that type of work to be interesting to me, particularly interesting to me. And I worried a lot about the juvenile court system because there, at least at that point, I haven't appeared in the juvenile court in probably, well, over 10 years now. So things are changing there too, but at that point it was overburdened. You just had the sense that things were going wrong. And the social workers had far too big a caseload, and they were just beginning, it seems to me, to bring in the court service officers who could meet with you beforehand and try to straighten out things, and get a child back on track and get a family the kind of support services they needed. That kind of work was very interesting to me because it seemed to me there was sort of a bedrock situation in our society. If things keep falling apart at this familial level, we're going to continue to have real problems. So that kind of work just interested me. It was more that even than the decedent's estates, which are the larger part of probate practice and probate court, but you have enough of the other to really feel that you're making a difference on a pretty personal level.
And it sounds to me you've enjoyed your years of being a probate
I have
judge.
very much enjoyed it, yes.
And you have no regrets?
I have no regrets, no.
And if you had a chance to live your life over again, Sheila, would you still choose to be an attorney, to be a lawyer?
I think so. I was terrible at chemistry, so other fields are not open to me. You have to go with your strength. And math and science were not mine. More the social aspect, the historical. I'm always interested in history too. That was my other choice for major. But so I think you go with your strength, and if those are the issues that draw you, those are the ones you should concentrate on. So I think I probably would have made very much the same choices.
Now, is there anything as you look back you wished you had done, some accomplishment, something you said, well, I wish I had taken that case, I wish I had gone here? Do you ever think about something in the legal career? I mean, you're a judge, which is a very high esteemed position. Is there anything else in the legal career you'd like to attain, you haven't? Can you think of anything?
I don't think of anything particularly. I'm happy with what I've accomplished. I think if you accomplish things in your family life and you feel successful there, and in your professional life where you've established at least some modicum of reputation, I think that's very satisfying.
And if you had to look and pick one accomplishment you're the proudest of, what would that be, Sheila?
Oh, that would certainly be my family. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And speaking of your family, do you have any grandchildren?
I have five grandchildren. We had 4 boys, and I now have 2 granddaughters, so they are a special treat, and have been doing grandmother duty the past few weeks too, as far as that goes. So that's a very special time of life, and when you have grandchildren who are a pure joy, you don't have any of the difficult times in their lives. You bring them back home. It really is. There's no downside to that.
And you have found now no problems with balancing your probate judge work with your family life now?
No. I think that blends pretty nicely. Yeah, and I've enjoyed creating that balance.
Sheila, just as a final question, this will be kept in the archives, and hoping that lots of young lawyers or even high school students doing a history report will come and want to hear about women in the law. And Is there any advice you'd like to give, either young women who are thinking about going to law school or young women who are just starting out in the practice of law? Any special tips, any advice?
Well, I think you just, if you have determined your own strengths, and made your decision that that's where you want to go, I think you go all the way with it. You take it just as far as you can. Understanding that life is always going to be a bit of a balancing act for all of us. But if that's your strength, then you should believe in yourself and keep at it, because it's going to turn out well.
Sheila, as we end here, I'd like to know whether there's anything you think that's important that I have missed asking you about that you'd like to put on the tape for history's sake. So I'm hoping I haven't missed anything, but if I have, I'm not Katie Kirk, so please,
I really don't think of anything that you've missed, Kathy. I think you've done a terrific job, and we've had a pretty good discussion, and things have occurred to both of us, during the course of our discussion, and stories that I might have had interviewing out of law school, that where questions were asked that would not, it would be against the law at this point.
Let's talk about that.
Those kinds of things. That's all different. People would never ask you these days if you're, how soon do you expect to have a family? Are you getting married? That was one of the questions. If you're going to get married and have children, we really don't want to, spend a lot of money educating you and training you and sending you out, and then you leave us. Those are questions that are just, off the chart now. That doesn't come up. You're judged on your individual ability and your own drive and your own ambition, and I think that's exactly how it should be. So they're kind of funny in retrospect, but they aren't really funny in the sense that people were not really judging you on your ability at that point. They were judging you on somewhat on your gender, and also on your, the direction your life might take.
And what we were saying, for me, I would think, oh my goodness, that question would be completely appalling. Whereas, right. You said that they asked a question with absolutely no belief that they were asking an inappropriate question.
That's right. Right.
And it sounds like
it was important to the interviewer to know. Well, if you're going to have children, you're going to leave us, right? So, and again, it was accepted interview practice. I don't think that if it wasn't as directly asked, it was more subtly discussed, but it was certainly an issue.
Well, I have no other questions, Sheila, but I have to say I have enjoyed this tremendously. I have always admired you.
Well, thank you, Kathy. You're very kind.
We are very happy to have you in our town and all the good works you've done, and so I was happy to be selected to be the person who got to interview you. So thank you very much,
I'm
Sheila.
glad that you did too, because we could have a nice, friendly discussion and feel comfortable with each other, and that's great.
Thank you, Sheila.